Find other great podcasts like this one at PodMoth.network.
Hello, and welcome to Crime and Spirits, your new favorite true crime and cocktail podcast. I'm your host, Bree.
And I'm your other host, Suze.
We're best friends who are obsessed with true crime, and we love a good themed cocktail. So, we took our two favorite things and turned them into a podcast. Every Sunday, we release a new episode covering a different case or topic of interest.
I'm the resident bartender here at Crime and Spirits. So, every time we get together, I mix up a drink that ties into the episode in some way, shape, or form, and then I teach you how to make one for yourself. That way, you can sip right along with us.
We like to keep things conversational around here, so expect some tangents on occasion, as well as some cursing here and there. Think of us as a cross between Dateline and Girls' Night.
So, come hang out with us every week while we learn a little something new together. We'd love to chat with you about whatever, really, but mostly true crime.
You better buckle up, Buttercup.
And sip tight.
Let's get on with the show.
Woo!
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Crime and Spirits. Thanks for joining us for some true crime and cocktails today. In case you don't already know, my name is Bree.
And I'm Suze.
We are your hosts, and we are so glad that you could stop by today. Now, before we get into things, Suze has a special announcement.
Just a little one. Today we are recording, it is December 14th, and I just wanted to wish my baby sister Amy a very happy birthday.
Happy birthday!
She's almost in her 40s.
Oh, she's going to kill you for saying that.
So this is her last year of fun and joy as a 30-something-year-old. So happy birthday, Amy.
Happy birthday, Amy.
Woo! But that was it.
Hey, that's worth it. Birthday shout-outs are the best.
Heck yeah.
Suze and I really enjoy celebrating our birthdays, so
It's
we're
true.
all for it.
Usually we celebrate for like a week or maybe the whole month, I feel sometimes.
Well, between you, myself, and Mark, we each have a month in the summer.
All of the
June,
summer.
July, and August. So we all just take turns.
It's true. I love it.
I do too.
Yes.
It's fun. Now, enough of all the shenanigans. Today we're going to be diving into a compelling tale of passion, deception, and justice delayed. You guys, we have a doozy for you today.
Yeah, this one's wild.
So our focus takes us back to the dark corners of the 1980s Los Angeles Police Department, where the line between protector and predator blurred in a very unexpected way. We are, of course, talking about the notorious murder of Sherri Rasmussen and the subsequent investigation into Stephanie Lazarus.
Bum, bum, bum.
And if this does not ring a bell, you are in for a treat.
Yes.
So please join us as we unravel the layers of this story while exploring the twists and turns that led to the unmasking of a killer within the LAPD. Today's narrative raises questions about trust, accountability, and the lengths some will go to protect their darkest secrets.
And they are dark, 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 dark. So our case today will include the discussion of stalking, corrupt law enforcement, and gun violence. This is a tale of love, betrayal, and a shocking crime that remained hidden in the shadows for quite literally years. The story is quite fascinating, but we understand if this one might not be for you. As a rule, we ask that you use discretion when listening. The topics we cover on this podcast are sensitive in nature and can be unsettling at times. Additionally, we have a whole segment centered around alcohol, so you know, there is that.
Right. Right. We do always encourage you to consume responsibly, whether that be alcohol, our content, or hopefully some mix of the two.
Yes, please.
Safety first.
Always.
And on that note, let's mix up some drinks.
Yeah.
I'm excited to try this one.
Right. It's I like it. I dig it.
I found it on Instagram and I was like, ooh, Suze.
Uh-huh.
We have to do this one.
And it just so happened that this drink has quite literally nothing to do with our case at hand.
Exactly.
The case was just too twisty to come up with a solid idea of what direction to go in. There was just a lot. So when in doubt, I go for a good seasonal drink. The Christmas season is upon us. Instagram is a wonderful source of knowledge. Bree sent me the link. Here we are. We have opted to make Buddy the Elf's Maple Sour. This drink specifically is from Nikki Sips on Instagram. Nikki Sips. We followed her recipe to a T. So if you want to check it out from her, feel free. We're going to do our little thing here. We are going to link it as a source, shout her out the whole 9 yards. It is her cocktail at the end of the day.
100%. We cannot take credit for this.
Not even
all,
remotely.
But we had to try it.
Full of good ideas. The name for one, all the stuff in it. Like,
well, you guys might not know this, but Elf is one of Suze's favorite movies. So as soon as I saw the name, it's done deal.
Could be.
She doesn't have a cardboard cutout in her house at all.
See, life size too, by the way. So the drink itself sounded delicious, but for me, it was the homemade old-fashioned gummy bears that she made. Like the drink, not old-timey. They're not old-fashioned like old. They're made of actual old-fashioned ingredients.
Yeah.
You can take some gummy bears, put them in a shallow dish, and cover them with booze for 3 days and get a pretty similar result. But the idea of making our own gummy bears here really just sounded awesome. So we're going to start there, because if you do want to make them, you've obviously got to pre-plan this and make them ahead of time.
You need to do those first.
Right. So I bought a gummy bear mold on Amazon through her link, Nikki Sip's link. I received 4 sets of molds that came with handy little like dropper things, and it was $6.50.
Not bad at all.
You could make a whole army of mini gummy bears. I did get the mini ones. They're just tiny and adorable. Like they would just look cute, sprinkled on stuff, honestly. Truly. So once you've got the molds in hand, you'll also need 3/4 cup of bourbon. We just use Jim Beam, mostly because I like it, but also because we have it on hand.
Mm-hmm.
You'll also want 1/4 cup of filtered water. You'll need 3 tablespoons of sugar and 10 drops each of Angostura bitters and orange bitters. For the orange bitters, we had some Pomander orange bitters from Wiggle Whiskey Company in Pittsburgh. So that's semi-local. We had it on hand. It just seemed like kismet. So that is what is in there. You'll also need something called agar agar. At first, I was like, what the fuck is this? What is agar?
What am I looking for?
You say it just sounds weird. I was like, where do I purchase it? I don't even know. Well, agar agar, known as just agar in culinary circles, is a plant-based gelatin derived from seaweed.
Oh.
The more you know. The white and semi-translucent vegetable gelatin is sold in flake, powder, bar, or strand form and can be used in recipes as a stabilizing and thickening agent. So that's exactly what that's doing here. Stabilizing it, thickening it, giving it that almost gelatin-like texture.
Makes sense.
Not quite the same, but like, it's pretty good. I bought it in the powder form at our local co-op after lots and lots of looking around for it, because I just assumed Wegmans would have it. They did not.
They usually have everything, so I'm kind of disappointed.
The co-op is cool, though. They have a whole rack of jars. You can fill up what you need. If it's 3 tablespoons, 3 teaspoons, a cup, 3 cups, the whole jar, whatever blows your hair back. I could have bought it on Amazon probably, but honestly, I just assumed it would be easier to find. I do want to say, though, agar agar is not so cheap. But it is vegan, so if that is a concern of yours, go pick some up.
This is
it can literally thicken up like almost anything. Yeah. When I say it thickened it up, I meant like, whoa. So, long story short, just go get some. It's pretty interesting stuff, so why not?
Especially if you have the option like the co-op where you can just get a small amount.
Just test it out, test drive it. And it's all in alphabetical order. I loved it there.
Oh, that's handy.
It was glorious.
Very satisfying.
So to make the bears themselves, take 3 teaspoons of your agar agar and add it to 3/4 cup of bourbon and 1/4 cup of filtered water. Bring it all to a boil and then add in 3 tablespoons of sugar. Stir all of this while the sugar is dissolving and then boil it for 2 more minutes. My mixture was already pretty gelatinous at this point, so I just kept mixing it while it was on the heat so that nothing burned, because you don't want... This looked like if it burned, you were never getting it off of your pan or your spoon or your whatever.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
It was pretty thick, you know? Once all that has boiled down, transfer it to a new dish and add 10 dashes of each bitters, the orange and the Angostura. Stir it all up. And then use the provided syringes that come with the molds to put that goopy stuff right into the molds. You kind of have to work quickly, though, because the mixture starts to solidify pretty quickly itself. I did make some big skull gummy bears because that was the only mold that I could fit it in quickly. Once you have accomplished all of that, let the bears sit at room temp for 1 hour. I just put them on a cookie sheet and put them in the oven while it was off so that my cat wouldn't bother it. And then... still in their mold, put them for 30 minutes in the fridge. If you want them to be a little chewier, which I sort of did, I let them air dry for 36 more hours at room temp. It seems like a lot, but it really didn't take me long to put it all together once I had everything assembled.
It was more just like the waiting game, if you
Correct.
will.
Yeah. Like, again, you have to pre-plan. If you want to do it, you got to pre-plan
That's kind of how like resin art is.
Yeah.
It takes very little time to put the project itself together. You just have to wait 24 hours until you can do anything else.
It's like the whole rest of it.
Yeah.
All right. So now that you've got the coolest garnish ever in the world, it's time to rock and roll. This week, we're making the Buddy the Elf's Maple Sour. Again, Nikki Sips. Can't say it enough.
Check her out.
Like Brie mentioned, she sent me the video and I was like, wow, we've got to do this. But when are we going to do this? I don't actually know.
It took like a couple of days and then all of a sudden I got a text message like, we're just going to do it this week.
It's true. Because
I ordered the molds.
I couldn't think of a better drink for this case. And honestly, it's seasonal. So there is that. Honestly, I love Elf. I'll make anything Elf. I don't really care. And the opportunity to use candy and maple syrup in a drink presented itself. So I was like, yes.
I feel like I just get so focused on spooky season and I feel so disconnected from Christmas a lot that I sleep on the yummy cocktails.
Yes.
And we need to rectify that.
We're going full seasonal for our end of the year blowout here. We're just doing it up.
So we're trying to fix that.
Right. So for the cocktail, you'll want those yummy homemade gummy bears as a garnish, as well as a lemon wheel if you're feeling fancy. This is a bourbon-based cocktail. So again, we're using our good old standby again, Jim Beam.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we had it on hand. Why the hell not? I also like it.
It's
so
good.
Who cares? You'll also need fresh squeezed lemon juice, maple syrup, ginger ale, and if you want to add some edible glitter, feel free. You know I love an excuse to put glitter in anything.
We love things to shimmer around here.
In a shaker filled with ice, add 1.5 ounces of your bourbon. If it's Jim Beam, so be it, or whatever floats your boat. 1.5 ounces of your fresh squeezed lemon juice, 1 ounce of maple syrup, and a dash of edible glitter if you feel like it. We did get our maple syrup at the co-op as well. It's from Meben Farms, which is in Wattsburg, PA, and kind of right down the street from us.
Yeah.
Once you've got all of that in your shaker, shake it up really well. The maple syrup, again, has like a slightly thicker consistency, so just make sure to give it a really good shaken up so that everything is not only chilled, but also well combined. You want that glitter flying around in there. Strain all of that over fresh ice in your rocks glass. We are using our fancy cubes this week because it's not 65 degrees out. I got the mold at Walmart for $3 and it's just the cutest thing. It looks like a little Christmas ornament with a snowflake on it.
It is cute.
So we're feeling festive.
Can confirm it's adorable.
Right. Once all that's in your glass, top it with a splash of ginger ale. Garnish it all with your lemon wheel and some of those little gummy bears on a stick. And that is it.
Okay, this is delicious.
Isn't it good?
This is really good.
The only thing that got me at first was like maple syrup in a cocktail. That's sort of like honey consistency. That's going to be all globby and weird. But this maple syrup's, again, it's like grade A fancy maple syrup.
If you use real maple syrup, it's much thinner than the fake shit you buy in the store that I love. I'm not judging.
No, I know. Me either. But I was like just envisioning like a gelatinous blob. But this is so much better.
This is good.
It's like crisp and refreshing. And
I wasn't sure how the lemon juice and the maple syrup would work, but I was intrigued and wanted to try it.
I know. Well,
this is good.
As I will keep saying, you had me at Buddy the Elf. I don't really care. You could put just straight sugar in a glass and I'd be like, let's try it.
I wasn't even really like, we should try this necessarily. I was like, oh, look, it's Buddy the Elf. And now here we are.
We're doing it. I don't know how, but we're doing it.
Not mad about it. So good. Thanks, Nikki Sips.
Thank you. All right, friends, while you're wrapping up your drink making, getting cozy, doing whatever it is you're doing, we're going to tell you all about the ODDentity Podcast.
The ODDentity Podcast is your bi-weekly foray into the weird, wonky, and sometimes downright spooky. Join host Janine Mercer as she leads you down the twisted pathways of history and tackles talks of the paranormal, weird historical people and practices, and so much more.
The ODDentity Podcast is a proud member of the PodMoth Media Network, and it can be found on the artist formerly known as Twitter and on Instagram at ODDentityPod, and is available wherever you binge your podcasts.
Shout out to Janine. She's pretty great.
Hey, girl, hey.
She kind of runs everything over at PodMoth.
She does, and we dig it, and we're so appreciative.
Heck yeah, we are. Definitely check out her stuff. I've listened to quite a few of her episodes at this point. If you like our stuff, you'll vibe with her, so I highly recommend.
Yeah.
Now, let's get to why we're all here.
Yes.
Who's ready to dig into this case? Because I know I am.
Pick me.
This one is nuts. So we're going to begin our story on the evening of February 24th, 1986. This is the time that a man named John Rutten arrived home from work and saw that his wife's BMW wasn't in the garage. Now, this was odd for two reasons. The first is that his wife, Sherri, hadn't gone to work that day, so her car should have been there. She wasn't feeling well in the morning, and she told John that she was likely going to either call off or work from home. Reason number two, the one that made John the most uneasy, he hadn't actually spoken to Sherri since that morning, despite making numerous attempts to get in touch with her throughout the day. John noticed some broken glass scattered across the driveway as he made his way inside the house. The first thing he saw was that the answering machine hadn't been activated, which was strange because the couple would be sure to do so every morning before leaving for work. It was ingrained into their daily routine.
It's like turning off the lights or locking the door. One of them always did that if they were the last person to leave the house.
Exactly. And unfortunately, when John further entered the home, this is when he found his wife dead on the living room floor.
So immediately, he called the police. They arrived on scene, started up their investigation. Sherri had been shot 3 times through a quilted blanket. At first, the police didn't know quite what to make of the scene. It looked like a burglary gone just terribly wrong. There were signs that a vicious struggle had taken place before the shooting occurred. It appeared as if a porcelain vase had been broken over Sherri's head, and there was a bloody handprint located next to the panic button. Furniture had been toppled over, most notably a credenza, which is ginormous and heavy AF. FYI, for those of you who don't know, because I did not, I had to Google it.
I was very glad that Suze Googled it.
I literally was like, what the fuck is a credenza? Well, for your knowledge, it's a dining room sideboard or display cabinet, usually made of burnished and polished wood and decorated with marquetry? I don't quite know. Do we add the Q? Nobody knows. The top would often be made of marble or another decorative liquid and heat-resistant stone. So it's a big, heavy piece of furniture.
Yes.
That takes a lot to topple over, long story short. Additionally, it appeared that the perpetrator of this burglary/murder had tried to bind Sherri at least once throughout the attack, but was unsuccessful. There was also a somewhat distinct bite mark located on Sherri's arm and a bruise on her face. Sherri did not cooperate in any way, shape, or form. She fought until the very bitter end here. When her body was examined, defensive wounds were noted, and she had broken 2 fingernails.
Initially, and for quite some time afterwards, the LAPD believed that this murder was the result of a botched burglary. Lead detective at the time, Lyle Mayer, considered a few possibilities during their investigation. Of course, they looked at John, the husband. He was cleared pretty quickly, probably because he had a pretty solid alibi. He had been at work all day, and not to mention, he was very obviously grieving the loss of his wife. As we've mentioned before, that's never a definitive tell in any way.
No,
but
absolutely not.
It certainly doesn't hurt.
Right.
So he was off the table pretty early on.
Almost immediately, yeah.
Police interviewed a maid that was cleaning a nearby apartment earlier in that day. She reported that she had heard what sounded like 2 people fighting and then something falling loudly, probably the credenza.
Giant-ass credenza.
At the time, she just wrote it off as a domestic dispute, kind of just minding her own business, and kept it moving. Additionally, a neighbor reported during their interview that they had randomly received a purse from 2 strange men who claimed to have randomly found it.
Random. How random?
Right. The neighbor, for what it was worth, assumed that the men were landscapers working in the complex somewhere, so they just kind of took the bag, said thank you, and watched the men take off. Now, if you can't figure out where I'm going with this, the purse belonged to Sherri, but it's unclear whether the neighbor looked through the purse immediately upon receiving it, or if they didn't even think about it again until the police came, or what that looked like. But it's a really weird instance in this whole thing. The working theory was that someone entered the home unlawfully and Sherri had surprised them while trying to steal some stereo equipment. Tale as old as time. This seems to be their explanation as to why there was absolutely nothing of value stolen from the home, There were only two things missing. The BMW, which was theorized to have been taken as a getaway car at like the last minute, and Sherri and John's marriage license.
That's such a strange thing to want to make off with.
Right? Why would somebody steal that when there's a BMW in the garage? So obviously there's...
Well, and very clearly they were living in a nice townhome. There was stereo equipment, BMW,
gated community,
jewelry, money.
You know, that whole thing.
Yeah. I have some questions.
So weird.
Hopefully we'll have answers. At any rate, 1 week after the murder, the BMW was located. It had been abandoned in a residential area only a few miles from the victim's home. According to Shannon Presby, a head deputy district attorney for the LA County DA's office, say that 5 times fast.
There's such long titles for no reason.
And I quote, "The car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. The car was processed, but there wasn't any fingerprints or anything of evidentiary value," end quote. Authorities still, despite lack of evidence, remained focused on that burglary theory. It certainly didn't help that there was another robbery that occurred in the same area and around the same time as Sherri's murder. Interestingly enough, there were 2 suspects in this other crime, and one of them just so happened to be carrying the same caliber of gun used to kill Sherri. In case you're keeping score at home, that would be a .38 caliber weapon. The burglary theory didn't quite sit right with Mayer's partner, Steve Hooks. He couldn't help but wonder about that bite mark. It was an unusual injury to sustain in itself, and most notably was something typically inflicted by women during physical struggles. It should be noted, just in case you're wondering, most burglaries are carried out by men. So that's not fitting, and it caused quite a disconnect for Detective Hooks, pretty much right out the gate.
I mean, I would feel perplexed as well, because none of it makes sense.
Right. Make it make sense, Bree.
Right. It doesn't. It will eventually, but right now it doesn't.
Not so much.
As we've said, the LAPD clearly had blinders on when it came to this case. And when this happens, it's often referred to as scenario lock. This was really interesting.
I didn't know this was a thing. Again, thank you, Google.
This is the term that's used to describe when investigators develop an early theory of a crime and just refuse to let go. In this scenario, investigators often ignore evidence that contradicts their narrative while cherry-picking clues and leads that support it. So kind of seems what we've got going on here.
Sort of, kind of, 100%. Yeah, it's my vibe.
I mean, the police were dead set on this being a burglary gone wrong. Even when Sherri's parents, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, begged police to look into John's ex-girlfriend. Per the Rasmussens, this person was stalking Sherri before her death because this person was still in love with John. Apparently, they had even gone as far as threatening Sherri with physical violence. Mayer brushed them off, and eventually the case went cold. About 8 months later, there was some media follow-up regarding the case, but nothing too crazy, although the Rasmussen family did offer a reward to anybody who had information that could help lead police to identifying their daughter's killer. Unfortunately, nothing came from that.
I will say, though, these parents are some of the most proactive people I've ever seen.
Relentless,
in an instance
but
like this.
It was necessary.
In the best way,
absolutely.
To get shit moving, quite literally.
They needed to be, as we are seeing.
And we'll see even more. So at the time Sherri's murder occurred and all of this investigation was going down, the LAPD were, to say slightly, preoccupied with other things. There was a huge surge of violence erupting throughout the city thanks to several gang wars, as well as that ongoing drug epidemic. Crack was a hell of a drug back then. It was cheap, easy to get. People were doing it like, whoa.
It was really bad.
It was a lot.
It's still bad, but this is
that was
a special
like the
time
first,
in history.
Yeah, the first instance where it was like, oh, holy shit. Everybody be smoking crack.
Okay.
Right?
This is what we're doing now.
Detectives weren't not able to devote much more attention to a case that many of them considered solved for all intents and purposes. It was a burglary gone wrong. We might know who did it, but we know what happened here. There's not any questions.
They didn't seem concerned.
Not at all. The Rasmussens, however, were quite frustrated with the treatment they received from the detectives. Just as an example, when the family called just to inquire about what was going on, they would often be put on hold immediately or just flat out be hung up on. I would not like that either, frankly.
I can understand being overwhelmed and having your hands full. I don't understand not treating them with dignity.
Because they're also victims, you know what I mean?
That's the very least. Like, if you don't have answers, you don't have answers. What are you supposed to do?
Well,
Bullshit
yeah.
out of your ass? Like,
No.
I get it. But you could be kind to them.
Just a little bit.
That part really broke my heart.
Just irks me.
Mm-hmm.
However, they didn't give up. A year after the murder, the Rasmussens reiterated their reward offer at a press conference and called for more action to be taken regarding their daughter's murder. Nels even wrote to Daryl Gates, the chief of the LAPD at the time, about the possibility that Stephanie Lazarus might have been involved. He was told by detectives that he, quote-unquote, watched too much television. But, God bless this man, it did not deter him in the least. He was unconvinced that Sherri, a 6-foot-tall woman in great physical shape, had been the victim of a botched burglary. It likely would have been a struggle for anyone to subdue her in close quarters at all, let alone for up to 90 minutes, which is what Nels was told that's how long the attack may have lasted. Again, there was the smashed vase, the defensive wounds, the credenzas flipped over. Like, there was a lot happening here. The girl put up a fight.
Yeah. The scene really spoke to, like, when we say vicious struggle,
we're not underestimating that in
not
the
even
slightest.
a little bit. And 90 minutes, that's a very long time for burglars who are often after items of value in the home, and they tend to try to get in and get the fuck out.
They want the stuff.
Right.
They don't want to interact with people, be seen by people, fight with people,
Right.
kill people.
On top of everything else, whoever shot Sherri had fired directly into her chest at close range and had taken the trouble to muffle the shot with the quilt. This all suggests to me that the killing was deliberate and not the accidental byproduct of a struggle.
It feels very intentional.
And Nels and his wife Loretta were absolutely convinced that this was premeditated murder carried out by John's ex-girlfriend. They were absolutely sure of it. And the LAPD was just not entertaining this possibility in any way.
Like, they didn't even want to hear it.
No, which seems odd, right? Because, in most instances, police, they want to close cases. They're usually receptive and willing to at least check something out.
Or at least listen,
Right,
They didn't even want to hear it.
They were, when I say they weren't entertaining it, I mean, you heard Suze, they were hanging up on these poor people when they were calling. Why was this time different? The answer to that, unfortunately, is simple. John's ex was a woman named Stephanie Lazarus, who just so happened to be a dedicated, successful, and highly respected member of the LAPD with no obvious connection to the victim. The officers all but laughed at the idea of her being responsible for Sherri's death. Nels and Loretta knew better. Stephanie Lazarus was an ex-situationship, if you will.
That's such a good way of putting it.
John and her were, not really a thing, but kind of a thing. We've all been there.
Uh-huh.
But Stephanie was not happy about the fact that John had picked someone over her.
Right.
So let's put a pin in things for just a moment. And let's go back to the year 1978. This is when Stephanie and John first met because, the true essence of the matter here lies in the question, were Sherri's parents merely clutching at any possibility for closure? Or were they the only ones cognizant of the sinister truth simmering just beneath the surface of this woman? We need to go back so we can understand how we got to Sherri's murder because her parents had every fucking reason to be suspicious of Stephanie.
Yeah, very suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into it. Stephanie Lazarus was a freshman at the University of California, Los Angeles when she began seeing a fellow student, John Rutten.
I think it's
Rutten. The two lived in the same dorm on campus and hit it off rather quickly. They were both avid athletes and would often go watch the other play as a show of support. Now, while their relationship wasn't strictly platonic, it wasn't a monogamous or serious one either. During his later testimony, John explicitly stated that she was never his girlfriend. He considered their relationship as, quote, necking and fooling around, end quote, and nothing more. Gross.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after John's graduation that the two took things a bit further and started having sex. according to that same testimony, John and Stephanie had sex 20 to 30 times between the years 1981 and 1984. To John, this was just a fling, like an off-on, whatever, we're feeling it, cool beans kind of thing.
Like we're friends and once in a while
we have some benefits, right?
You know, spend the night together, get a little saucy.
But Stephanie, ooh,
buddy.
She fell hard. She fell fast.
That
She
she
became
did.
completely enamored with John. She would often steal his clothes while he was in the shower and would take pictures of him in his undies while he slept.
Don't like it.
I think that's weird, but then things get more weird. After graduation, John accepted a job with a company called Micropolis, which was a disk drive company that is no longer in business because disk drives.
Not a thing anymore.
It just made me think of like floppy disks in this era.
When I was reading your research, because I've recently discovered that comedian, and I was reading it and I was like, oh, floppy disks, because it was the 80s.
Yep,
Like,
I'm always like, ooh, that doesn't seem that long ago, but it was.
I know.
Stephanie graduated from college a year later, and she applied to the LAPD's Police Academy.
So it wasn't long after they kind of started settling into their post-college lives that John met Sherri Rasmussen, a bright young woman who worked in nursing. Sherri was a graduate of Loma Linda University at just 20 years old. Yes,
What?
She started college at 16. This woman was fucking smart.
Good for her. And she worked very hard to get where she was at.
Oh, she absolutely did. By her late 20s, she was the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Sherri was just the total package. So it's no surprise that John fell head over heels in love with her almost immediately after meeting. However, John was still not really, but kind of sort of dating Stephanie at the time, and Stephanie was completely unaware that he was seeing someone else seriously. I don't even think that she knew that their relationship was technically open in the first place.
So hear me out. I feel like she knew, she just didn't want to believe it, because this seems like a woman who wanted her things and wanted to have them herself. She did not share well. She did not play well with others.
Well, and
in this romantic respect, at least.
I totally agree. And I also don't think that John was innocent in the situation either.
If I had to guess, Brie, I would say he was not straightforward and forthcoming about
it. As if he also wanted to have his cake and eat it too.
Ugh, sons of bitches.
Like, I definitely am not going to stand up or defend Stephanie at any point in the story, because every move she made was wrong.
Right.
But I don't know. I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are at the end of this, because there's something about John that doesn't sit right with me.
Just wait.
It gets better or worse depending on how you're looking at it. Because things eventually came to a head, and this occurred when Stephanie threw John a surprise birthday party. He was turning 25. This is when he decided to tell her that not only was he in love with another woman, but he was going to marry this woman. And after this, Stephanie began to spiral.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah, that is an understatement for sure.
And I mean, good news for future stuff. All of this was documented. She wrote in her journal, quote, "I really don't feel like working. I found out that John is getting married," end quote. That's just one example. There's a lot more.
And that on the surface might seem like innocuous, but that right there is the ramblings of a depressed person.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's sad, it's devastating. He didn't return your feelings, but like, think about it. This is a woman who's in the LAPD, who is ambitious as fuck, and she is letting this deter her from doing her job. Which you guys will see that that's not like typical for her.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, I agree. You'll see. You'll see. So in an attempt to persuade John to change his mind, Stephanie took it upon herself to write his mother a letter.
Every time this happens, I'm just like, why? Just leave the moms out of this.
She did nothing. He's a grown up for all intents and purposes.
He just turned 25.
Goodness gracious. So she wrote this letter in August of 1985, and she stated, and I quote, "I'm truly in love with John, and the past year has really torn me up. I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision," end quote. Stephanie fell into a deep depression. She refused flat out to accept the fact that John was committed to Sherri. Desperate, it's Put that on a t-shirt, Brie. Whew. She went to visit him at his condo one night. She tried to convince him to change his mind. He said no. The one time, he said no. So she switched up tactics and started asking for closure in the form of closure sex. Ugh.
I love the face and the air quotes that she just made. Oh my god. I mean, that is
gross.
That's manipulative at best.
You're so committed to her that you're going to sleep with someone else? Ew. Ew.
Right. This is where he loses me.
I know, right? And you lost me. In John's later testimony, Stephanie asked him if they, quote, could be intimate one more time, end quote. He agreed and told her in no uncertain terms that this was their last time. He says, he said, this was the only time that this happened after his commitment to Sherri. I hope that's true, but I have some doubts.
That's always the murky waters part of dating, right? It's when did you decide you were exclusive? When were you breaking the rules versus when you weren't? I don't know. It's a gray area.
Nobody except John does. I mean, really. He's the maestro here.
Well, and then you got Stephanie, who was a petty bitch, and she sure did track Sherri down to let her know about what had transpired between them. According to some sources, this confrontation went down at the hospital that Sherri worked at.
How fucking ballsy. I'm just
super
saying.
fucking bold. Because there were people around, like quite a few people that witnessed this exchange. But, you know, like everything else, this was never looked into during the initial investigation. And this was the moment where Stephanie had allegedly threatened Sherri with like a, if I can't have him, no one will kind of thing.
Ooh.
That's pretty frightening to me.
Well, yeah. And if I know anything about this lady, she said it in a very aggressive fashion, I'm
absolutely.
sure.
I was watching
with her crazy eyes
some video as I was prepping for this, and somebody was like, she sure did roll up in there and be like, bitch, I have your man, or something like that. And
honestly,
I was like, oh, damn. But that's exactly what I imagined. And this can be described as nothing other than like a complete and total outburst of just rage and emotion coming from Stephanie. And it was likely brought on by the fact that John told Stephanie after the closure sex
that
he was still going to marry Sherri, that none of this was going to change anything. And as you can imagine, this was just another devastating blow to Stephanie, who was already so distraught and so devastated by this that when she got home, she had to wake up her roommate because she didn't want to wallow alone. Which I also think is interesting because that's somebody else that's kind of a witness to this whole breakdown and just the trajectory that this is going down.
Right. Like you can claim you're all put together and stuff, and then you have a moment like that. Like that person saw all that occur, you know what
Allegedly, I mean? Stephanie woke her up.
Out of like a dead sleep in the middle of the night.
They better have been besties or something because that's
I feel like
rude.
they were just roommates, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
Won't be. Another weird incident that speaks to Stephanie's odd behavior, just as an example. One day she decided to swing by the apartment that John shared with Sherri. She had skis with her and asked John if he would wax them for her. What?
Why?
Bitch, wax your own skis to show off because Sherri wasn't okay with it, obviously, but John agreed to do it anyways. I would like to think he's a nice person, but that's questionable at best. Sherri did, however, clock the outfit that Stephanie was wearing, which was apparently a very flattering workout ensemble, complete with crop top. I'm going to assume there was spandex involved because, again, it was the 80s. And I'm sure Sherri was a very confident woman. Obviously, she had made it to her late 20s being in charge of stuff, like graduating college early.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, though, that's just off-putting. Well, you're coming into my home looking like a hoe, asking for wax skis.
Well, it's because women fucking know, and men are delusional. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it. You the
truth comes out.
You fucking know.
You hear it today, right now, on Crime and Spirit.
But I mean, if a woman or whoever, I mean, gender, I guess, really doesn't matter here. If somebody is trying to make a play for your person, you fucking know when it's happening.
Oh, no, for sure.
But the person who's getting the play made at is usually delusional.
I feel like he had to have been delusional.
I've had this conversation with Mark before. Like I've seen it play out.
Like I see you
I can
with the eyes.
say this from experience.
At any rate, Sherri knew this visit was about a lot more than just some skis and some wax.
She graduated college at 20. She was smart.
She's not an idiot. So once Stephanie dropped off the skis, etc., Sherri confronted John and asked him point blank if he was still messing around with Stephanie. John remained steady in his assertion that they were just good friends.
Of course.
They always are.
Honestly, though. You know, Sherri managed to forgive John for his former stumble, if you will. But I feel like her patience with this shit was starting to wear thin. I can only imagine.
I am wearing thin just reading about it, personally. I can't imagine this poor girl living through it.
I mean, and this is only the beginning. The cherry on top of this particularly weird situation was that when Stephanie came back to pick up her skis, she made sure she was in uniform, she was armed, and conveniently, John had literally just left for work.
Interesting.
If that wasn't a move to intimidate her, I don't know
what would be.
Things escalated even further when Sherri was suddenly being followed by someone who appeared to be a woman dressed as a man with quote unquote crazy eyes. And I'm going to link a video.
Oh my God.
To
so crazy.
We've talked about their channel before. It's JCS Criminology, I think, on YouTube. They did like a breakdown of the infamous interview that we'll get into later, but her eyes absolutely are crazy.
Yes. That's I read that quote and I was like, oh my God, I've never read anything more accurate.
So accurate.
Whoa. So Sherri wound up sharing what was happening with this whole situation with Stephanie with her dad. She was unnerved, to say the very least, and pleaded with John to tell Stephanie to just stop. Like, just quit. You lost the game. I'm sorry, sis.
Like, move the fuck on, bitch. There's the door, bitch.
I know. See you later. Bye. He responded by reiterating that there was nothing to their relationship and that they both needed to just ignore Stephanie.
See, this is the kind of shit that makes me so heated, because how hard would it have been for him to just be like, yes, I will talk to her and I will put down this boundary.
Yeah.
Even if it was nothing.
Well, if it was nothing, you should have been able to be like, this is the line.
I mean, right.
We're good.
I didn't want to say it, but she said it.
Oh, I went there. So shortly before her death, Sherri confided in her father that she was actually afraid of Stephanie and the fact that she was probably the one stalking her.
Yes.
Yet, Sherri still married John in November of 1985. Not only are there red flags, it's that little guy in the video waving like the marching band size
the
one.
color guard flag.
Yep, absolutely.
And he's just running through the woods.
He's like, and he'll just be like, yup.
Oh my God.
Like,
He fucking cracks me up. Rachel sends me those videos all the time and I love it.
I could watch him endlessly. Apparently his girlfriend just made him a red and a green flag, so now he can have some green mixed in for some good stuff.
Yay.
Allegedly. So...
No green flags here,
right?
Though.
This is all big red ones. So at the end of the day, you can see why Nels and Loretta Rasmussen were so adamant for police to just at least look into Stephanie as a person of interest. It's pretty obvious, at least to the two of us here and probably you guys listening, that this bitch is guilty.
As fuck.
Like, honestly, stamp it on her forehead. Guilty. Do not collect go. Do not collect $200. But the LAPD just were not having it. And Sherri's murder case stayed cold. Eventually, Meyer retired, which meant that a new detective would be assigned to the case. Unfortunately, the new officer couldn't follow up on Meyer's notes and didn't feel as if any new leads would emerge anyways, so he chucked it in the bin and it just gets cold again. Stays cold?
Yeah, stays cold, I guess, is a better way to put it. It should be noted that Stephanie Lazarus briefly reunited with John in 1989. And we can really only kind of figure this out based on some notes that Myers had made. Apparently, John had called him one day and asked if the detective was 100% sure that there was no evidence linking Stephanie with his late wife's death. Now, the real question here is, did he make that call before or after he hooked up with her again?
I bet it was before.
Really? Because I thought it was after. Like, I feel like I could imagine her saying something fucked up
I thought it as like let me just check one more time with people that are actually checking it out.
Yeah.
Just to make sure there's like no evidence so I can proceed.
I think either way, it's totally fucked.
I think I wrote in my notes, I was like, let me just go bathe in bleach really quick because
I almost put it in here just as a reminder.
well, it's fine. I mean, I'll say it because it really just made me feel some type of way. If there was any chance that this woman was involved,
how he didn't
he had
that
to have
himself known. Is beyond. I mean, obviously he did, at least to an extent. But another thing that we would also
is
like
that
to
guilty
know,
conscience? Like, I don't know.
He did not pressure police in any way, shape, or form.
For anything, for any kind of progression on the case. Nothing like what her parents did. Not even remotely close. He didn't even make a phone call other than this one, I think.
I think you're right. Now, that could be, explained away. Grieving husband, all that jazz. But I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me personally.
He did also leave LA not long after his wife's murder, but still.
But he also moved on from what I heard kind of quick. There's just, it's a lot of layers here.
It just makes me feel like an icky onion again. Ew.
Just what? You called the detective investigating your wife's murder?
I honestly think it's so he could get the green flag.
No.
I would have been like, hell no. But again, like we keep saying, the LAPD at this point in time literally just had blinders on. They were like, it's a burglary gone awry.
And honestly,
nothing more to it.
The detective noted it in the case file. But so it was worthy of you writing it down, but not worthy of you being like, this seems weird.
Something seems off here.
Nobody but his partner even was like, hey, what about that weird bite mark? Should we look at that at all?
No, nobody cares. Cool.
Super weird.
Cool.
And then we fast forward to 1993, where Nels offered to pay for DNA testing of any evidence from his daughter's murder, because at that point, or up until this point, the technology just wasn't available. So there weren't any kind of forensics even ran on any cases like this. And, that freaking bite mark, maybe.
That unusually placed bite mark on her arm
might be a good place to start.
Just thinking, outside the box here.
But the LAPD, once again, kind of just scoffed at the idea, and they told Nels that they couldn't do the testing because apparently a suspect was required before they could proceed. I feel like if you have a private citizen willing to pay for that, is that not enough?
So, hear me out.
I don't know.
I think back then they thought they needed to have a side-by-side comparison versus just having one thing to maybe compare to something in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
sort
that's
of
fair.
see it, but like...
and the technology was new.
It was in its infancy then, so I guess in this instance...
I mean, I'll give them that too. And they could have been telling the truth for all I know. I don't want to completely besmirch their name or anything.
Well, I truly didn't go down the rabbit hole of DNA testing.
No, we had enough to handle this case.
I don't have 6 days to just read about that and try and decipher each word. Because a lot of the stuff that's DNA related, I'm like, what does that mean, Google?
Yeah. It's a lot of windows and tabs. It's a lot.
It's a big rabbit hole. So throughout all of this time, the duration of this investigation that's not an investigation, Stephanie Lazarus continued working with the LAPD before eventually starting her own PI firm. She had won medals, worked in the DARE program, was promoted to a detective. Sometime in the mid-90s, roundabouts 1996, she met and married a fellow officer. The two adopted a daughter together. At the time of the murder, John was so overwhelmed by grief that he was fired, we think, or quit, whatever narrative you want to hear.
He did not have a job.
He literally left the LA area. He did, however, eventually go on to remarry. Again, I have to repeat, it was not to Stephanie Lazarus. Still and all, he did not choose her.
Which, man.
Had to grind her fucking gears, huh?
It had to have drove her fucking nuts. Especially because she couldn't tell anybody about the murder. She eventually met and married somebody else. But at the time when they reunited... How pissed do you think she was?
Oh, yeah. I wonder if he gave her the whole spiel again. I'm just not ready. I can't commit to you.
Or she was feeling real confident and real good about herself because I don't even want to say the words. It makes me gross thinking. It makes me feel gross. So we're not going to do it.
But I know where your head's going.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. Full body chills. Don't like it. In the late 1990s, with the increasing prominence of DNA testing, the LAPD established a specialized unit that was tasked with re-evaluating forensic evidence from cold case files. They were looking to potentially identify new leads through DNA analysis. Now that this technology was available and it had kind of some of the kinks starting to work out, they wanted to see what they could.
They finally had a foothold where it was like more accessible, more usable. It was solving some cases here and there. So they were like, let's test it
see
out.
what we could figure out.
Because I can only imagine the stack of cold cases that they just had.
Especially because they knew to collect forensic evidence, there just wasn't a lot that they could do with it.
At least preserve it. I mean, to a degree, you know what I mean? So.
And, of course, among the cases deemed promising was the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. Yay!
Oh.
However, it wasn't until 2004 that a criminologist named Jennifer Francis moved forward with Sherri's case. Now, some crucial evidence/materials seem to have been missing, but she went ahead with what she could. And although she found no matches in the combined DNA index system database, she did discover that the saliva in the sample was from a female, which if you're keeping score at home, directly challenged the original theory of burglary.
That long-held theory of burglary by two men wielding a .38 caliber weapon.
That Steve freaking Hooks figured out, like, the week of the murder.
I was like, the day of the murder. That's just...
The fuck, though?
Man, stuff like this just really makes me want to flip tables over.
Honestly, though.
Ugh. So several years later, Jennifer Francis, who had access to the entire case file, stumbled upon a report of a quote-unquote third-party female, just happened to be Stephanie Lazarus, who had allegedly harassed the victim before the murder. When Francis inquired about Lazarus, the supervising detective revealed that she was a current LAPD detective and dismissed any connection to the case, insisting it was a simple burglary as previously concluded. No, it's not.
They were working.
No, the fuck it's not.
So fucking hard.
To cover it up. If anything, it takes more effort to like swaddle all this under a blanket and hide it away.
Because there's never been anything that's truly confirmed this, but I think, at this point, that has to be the only explanation, right? That they actively had to try to cover up any involvement that she had.
This was intentional
on
the LAPD's part.
This is just
too coincidental for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So despite this major revelation that's taking place, no other detective pursued the case. And yet again, it was relegated to the cold case files. How fucking frustrating.
I get frustrated just reading that. Now, by the time 2009 came along, crime in LA had declined enough from its earlier levels that detectives began actively seeking cold cases so they could start to increase their clearance rates. In the Van Nuys office, Jim Nuttall and Pete Barba reviewed the Rasmussen file with interest, like a lot of interest.
Fucking good. It's about time.
These are the guys that really, they get the home run here. So they decided to pursue it and see what they could potentially find out. And thanks to those earlier findings, they decided that the burglary theory was invalid, which meant they had to start from scratch, which is probably what this case required at this point.
Yes, we needed to start over here.
100%. So these two guys looked at the case as a murder first, and that the burglary was staged to throw the police off the trail. There were many aspects of the crime that were just improbable for a break-in, especially when committed in daylight.
Broad daylight. It was like morning.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse you.
Rasmussen's jewelry box, an inviting target for a burglar, was in plain view atop her dresser and had not been touched. The condo was in the middle of a gated complex, surrounded by other units from which burglars could have expected to be easily observed. And the front door had an alarm warning and had not been forced open, as it might have been if the burglars had not expected anyone to be home. Those are all like pretty key factors leading into a burglary, I think.
Like proven factors. And again, like the middle of the complex thing, like they usually pick ones on the outside. Like there's just random things like that. That's
none of it make like, is it possible? Sure.
Absolutely.
But none of it makes any fucking sense.
No. It's almost like somebody who knew what they were doing staged it all.
Oh, no.
So a key aspect of the crime scene was also inconsistent with this burglary theory. At the top of the stairs was a stack of stereo equipment atop of a VCR. If, as evidence suggested, the struggle between Sherri Rasmussen and her attacker had begun upstairs and then continued downstairs, that stack would likely have been knocked downstairs and scattered, to say the least, because there was, again, a violent struggle happening.
Right.
It made more sense to assume that it had been stacked afterwards, when an actual burglar would have fled the scene immediately after the shooting and not stayed to worry about staging the scene.
Right.
Just saying.
And the forensics reinforced this theory. On a record player atop the stack was a thumb-shaped bloodstain. It had no print, which suggested whoever left it was wearing gloves, to avoid being identified.
It's almost like they know what's happening.
But the blood was Sherri's, suggesting the equipment had been stacked after the struggle and after the shooting. It had been left behind, the detectives realized, to make the crime look like something other than what it really was.
Ooh. From the 4-bound volumes of the case file, detectives developed a list of 5 female suspects. Not all was taken aback when John told him over the phone that Stephanie Lazarus was a police officer. By this point in time, she had been promoted to a higher level of detective and was working on art theft cases as part of the Commercial Crimes Division. It takes a lot to get to that level.
It really does.
That takes trustworthy people.
Mm-hmm.
I have some questions.
Well, and somebody who is going to work all the time.
Well, yeah. Off the job, Lazarus had been active in the LA Women Police Officers Association and organized childcare for families of officers. Since Stephanie Lazarus was still a part of the department, Nuttall and Barba decided that they would have to proceed very carefully. Oh, so carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Still, they ranked Stephanie Lazarus as the least promising of the 5 suspects, since they read in the files that she and John had ended any relationship they had had over the summer before the murder. So why would she even care? We said, in unison. Surround sound.
So their investigation soon eliminated all but one of the other women. The other, a former coworker of Sherri's who had some disputes with her on occasion, was eliminated by a covertly collected DNA sample. This left only Stephanie.
Oh, no.
The officers kept their investigation a closely guarded secret. They knew they would have to. Not only was Stephanie an officer, but so was her husband, and he worked in the Commercial Crimes Division as well. She also may have had other friends in the department who could have tipped her off. They had no idea who they could trust, and if she was Sherri's killer, she very well could have improved her defense if she knew they were looking into her.
These are all valid concerns. I know how gossip spreads at my job.
Right?
Like wildfire.
Same. And
it's like you light dust on fire. It's like just flames.
Honestly.
And I can only imagine it would be just the same.
100%.
Especially with the high stakes game like life or death, type status.
Over 2 decades old cold case.
That too.
Was like a murder charge that they're looking into. So, if on the off chance that she weren't guilty, they definitely wanted to make sure they were covering all their bases because, like I said, if she wasn't guilty, they would have just unintentionally smeared a fellow officer who had an unblemished service record over the course of her career. She had no disciplinary investigations, no civilian complaints, nothing. So they knew that they couldn't go into this without being 100,000% sure.
Like super sure.
Which I think, honestly, at this stage in the game, this is all what this case needed.
I literally was like, for once, somebody in this case is making some damn sense. And doing things correctly.
Thank goddess.
About time. So the officers referred to Stephanie Lazarus only as number 5 and worked on the case after hours or behind closed and locked doors. They even went as far as to develop cover stories to explain why they wanted to look at personnel records for one officer specifically from 20 years ago. The detectives began looking into other aspects of Stephanie's life during the mid-1980s. Another detective recalled that at the time, most LAPD officers had preferred a .38 caliber weapon as their backup or off-duty carry gun. In fact, they were required to purchase only weapons compatible with the Federal Plus P ammunition that had been used specifically in Sherri's murder. State and departmental records showed that Stephanie had indeed owned a Smith & Wesson Model 49 .38 caliber at the time, and, coincidentally, had reported it stolen to Santa Monica police, but, it should be noted, not to her own department's armorer, 13 days after the murder. Sheer coincidence?
That is suspicious.
Super suspicious. Since the location where Stephanie had reported the weapon stolen from was near a popular pier, they assumed she had thrown the gun into the Pacific Ocean, long gone, sayonara, see you never, etc., etc. So without that weapon specifically, DNA would be the only definitive way to connect the crime directly to Stephanie Lazarus.
So the two detectives theorized from their own experience about how an LAPD officer would go about committing a murder. It would be better to do it on an off day. And records showed that Stephanie sure did have the day off, the day Sherri was killed. Officers would know better than to use their duty gun, since it would have to be disposed of after the crime, and the penalties for losing a duty gun or failing to prevent its theft were quite severe. So instead, it made sense to use a backup gun, kind of like Stephanie's .38.
Ooh, the missing one at Santa Monica Pier?
That's Smith & Wesson.
What a coincidence. I lost it at the pier while I was riding the Ferris wheel. What? I have a lot of questions.
Could you imagine being her superior? Like, you did what?
I know.
And lastly, a working patrol officer would know how to do just enough to make the crime scene look like an interrupted burglary to satisfy an overworked detective, which was pretty much every single detective in the LAPD at the time.
So we're checking some boxes here, eh?
Maybe just one or two.
Right. Nels Rasmussen told Nuttall about Lazarus's continued contact with his daughter. This had not been in the files, despite the fact that Nels mentioned it frequently during Meyer and Hook's interviews.
You guys, they didn't even put it in the fucking files.
Or if they wrote it down, they just crumpled it up and threw it away.
I'm filled with rage.
So angry. Realizing that Stephanie Lazarus was now their one and only, pretty much, prime suspect, the detectives informed their superiors and arranged to discreetly collect a voluntary
It's been a long day, guys.
Woo!
The liquor's starting to hit. What do you want from us?
They arranged to discreetly collect a voluntarily discarded DNA sample from Stephanie Lazarus.
Ooh, there we go.
Ooh, I got it. They could do so without having to get a warrant, which would have immediately let Stephanie know that she was under investigation. So while she was off duty and running errands, Lazarus discarded a cup from which she had been drinking at a Costco, from what I read, which other police officers who were on her tail then retrieved. A sample was taken from it, which matched the DNA from that very unusual bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm.
So they had to plan her arrest pretty fucking carefully.
Because this bitch is crazy.
They had to make sure they covered all their bases. And this was a crazy bitch who carried a gun. So on the day of her arrest in June of 2009, officers were briefed on a search warrant that they were told would be executed outside the city. They weren't really given details beyond that. They were trying to keep everything hush-hush until they had Stephanie in custody. The officers then went to wait near her home in Simi Valley, which is where she would commute to the city. A short time later, detectives who had been selected specifically because they had a lack of a personal connection to Stephanie called her from the lockup at Parker Center, the department's headquarters. So they wanted this location specifically to be used because Lazarus would have to surrender her gun and equipment belt to enter, which would limit the possibility she might resist violently when she was arrested, which was they were planning on that happening immediately after the interview.
If it all went like it was supposed to.
Right.
That's how it would go down.
Or if she realized that she was the prime suspect and tried to retaliate in any way. This was just a way to try to make it safer without tipping her off in any way. For
everybody involved, yeah.
Yeah. So they had two other detectives, Greg Stearns and Dan
Jaramillo?
Yes.
I don't know.
Sure.
I'm bad at pronunciating stuff, and also Google Speaks is not so good all the time.
I always, you know what my problem is that I'm nervous I'm going to mess it up, even though I practiced it, and then my anxiety gets the best of me. So
Just charge ahead. When
These
in
two
doubt,
other detectives
we're sorry.
told her that they had someone in custody who wanted to talk to her specifically about an art theft. So she had no idea about anything. She was like, oh, totally makes sense.
Absolutely.
I'll
be right there.
Right on over. And she sure did.
After she entered the interrogation room, gave up her gun, her belt, the whole 9 yards, the detective explained that this case was really about some loose ends they were trying to tie up in the Sherri Rasmussen murder. Since her name had come up during the investigation, they claimed they wanted a private setting because while John was just an old boyfriend, Stephanie had long been married to someone else, and they did not want her private life to become the subject of office fodder and gossip and water cooler talk.
Right.
The detectives knew that they would have to tread very carefully since Stephanie Lazarus herself was aware of police interview techniques and her rights to silence and legal counsel, which she could invoke at any time.
And she would pick up on something, you know, like if they were trying...
she's used the tactics, she would know they were being used on her, right? Kind of thing.
I would assume so.
You never can tell.
Well, I mean, I think being able to cover up your murder for over 2 decades, she wasn't dumb.
Right.
I'll give her that.
Doesn't mean we have to like her.
No. Oh, no. Still filled with rage over here.
The officers leading the interrogation rambled. They digressed from the subject at times, sometimes discussing unrelated police business, but eventually everything kept coming back to Sherri Rasmussen and her murder.
The interview is something to behold, and
There
I definitely
is footage of it.
think you guys should check it out.
We're going to link that, or at least one way to get to it.
For sure. You can find the full interview on several different channels on YouTube. You can find, commentary about it. Behavioral analysts have studied it. It's a very interesting take.
I really think watching like the uncut real version, if you will, is so unsettling. It was like
an hour and 15 minutes. It's not terribly long. Somebody made a comment on the one video I watched, and they're like, I'm going to do a drinking game every time she says it's been so long ago. I'm going to take a shot. And they're like, they commented later in the feed, and they're like, yeah, I had to stop.
It's too much.
Because it's true. Every other sentence is, it's just been so long. It's been so many years. It's blah, blah, blah. Like, she used that to try to cover for the fact that she quote unquote didn't know anything, but she
like as a deflection, she's like, oh, it's just been so long. I'm like,
And I highly recommend, if you're going to check out the interview, watch one of the many channels where they have like non-verbal analysis and things like that. It's fucking fascinating to watch on her face the different stages of, oh shit, I need to come up with something
of realization.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, she claimed to recall very little due to the intervening years, but she gradually revealed more and more knowledge, including indirect acknowledgments of visits that she paid to the condo and a specific encounter at Rasmussen's office, until she finally realized what was happening. And she asked her colleagues, do you consider me a suspect? Pretty much just flat out.
Point blank, period.
The detectives mentioned it was possible that they had DNA evidence from the crime scene, and then they requested a sample from her.
Ooh.
And she declined and then walked out of the room. As she walked out into the hallway, she was met by officers who then placed her under arrest.
For the murder of Sherri Rasmussen.
Fucking finally.
About time. Jeez. So once she had been arrested, the police officer teams in Simi Valley began searching Lazarus's home and her vehicle. In her house, they found her journal from the mid-1980s with numerous mentions of her undying love for John and her despondence over his engagement to Sherri. And quite literally no mentions of her gun having been stolen while enjoying a day out at the pier.
So odd.
It's almost like it's a lie.
It's almost like it didn't happen.
Her computer showed that she had searched the internet for John's name on several occasions during the late 1990s. So she said he didn't mean that much to her.
Right. Right.
And yet
they were just friends.
Here we are still searching decades later for this person.
I mean, the late 1990s, you were married with a child at that point.
What you be doing, girl? It's almost like you're holding a candle for somebody.
So many LAPD officers were stunned. They were just stunned at the idea that Stephanie Lazarus might have murdered someone. And I mean, I get it. You know, the fellow detectives really only knew her as a vivacious and supportive fellow officer.
Well, you truly never want to think that about anybody, you know, let alone somebody you work with day in and day out.
Especially considering what they do. I mean, I'm close to my barista family. I can only imagine what it's like for police officers, you know?
I absolutely feel the same way.
Yeah.
And we just sling food and drinks.
Right,
I can't
exactly.
imagine like trying to solve crimes, you know?
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I can't really blame them there as long as they didn't have anything to do with the cover up. There were some fellow detectives, though, that said that they would call her Lazarus behind her back.
I was like,
when she
that seems fitting.
would get angry. So that was kind of funny.
Because apparently she would literally spaz out, just freak out and let her rage get the best of her.
Yeah. It's almost like it's been simmering beneath the surface this whole time. Now, there was a case that Stephanie was actively working on, hence why she was willing to go talk to somebody in the first place. There was art theft work, elder abuse, real estate fraud, all this kind of shit, but they had to drop it because, you know, it wouldn't have been able to be prosecuted successfully if the lead investigator herself was facing a murder charge.
Especially one like this with cover-up aspects and all that kind of stuff. They would have to assume that it wouldn't work, right?
She was held in the Los Angeles County Jail after her arrest, but you want to know the most fucked up part? Maybe not the most fucked up part, but this is pretty awful. She was allowed to just retire early from the LAPD rather than like getting fired or disgraced in any kind of way. They just let her retire.
That pissed me the fuck off.
I don't know why I take it so personally, but I'm upset about it.
Well, I know she had good service in the middle, but at the beginning she committed a murder and then at the end she was prosecuted for murder. So what makes you think that anything she did in the middle was...
Except like can just be...
what if she fucked up all of her other cases? What, you know what I mean? I would have questions if I was convicted of something under her direction.
Absolutely. Well, and like I'd also be upset. Like, okay, we let her go talk to children in schools and shit.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember the DARE program was such bullshit. But I remember police officers coming into school and shit. Like, you just let her around children, a crazed murderer.
I'm just saying.
I don't know. I just don't like it.
If they just would have checked out the angle at the beginning, maybe we wouldn't be here.
I just can't help but feel like the lead detective was friends with her or something. Like there had to have been something with him specifically because he was the one that was in charge of it all. Like he was the one that was like batting people away left, right, and sideways.
Because there were a lot of people that were like, maybe look into this. And he was like, no
thanks. It's a burglary, guys.
I just, again, like we always say, cases like this, it's just such a fucking travesty.
It really
that
is.
Nobody looked at, like, quite literally, like, the most obvious answer sometimes might be the correct answer.
It's, when you hear hooves, it's horses, not zebras.
I know.
Like, come on, guys.
At any rate, a bail hearing was not held for almost 6 months in this case. Judge Robert J. Perry surprised both sides when he set the amount at $10 million in cash.
Yeah, buddy.
That was well above what the defense had suggested and more than twice what prosecutors had even proposed.
I thought that was funny.
Good. That's a big, like, giant middle finger. Fuck you. The case against Stephanie Lazarus was very strong, he said, and thus she might well be at risk of fleeing the country or obtaining weapons through her husband or whatever. Stephanie Lazarus's lawyer, Mark Overland, said the judge did not understand the case well and contrasted the high figure with the $1 million bail set for Robert Blake and Phil Spector when they were charged with murder. Those were elderly men at the time they were charged with murder, not a vivacious woman. You
not
know what I mean?
Lazarus over here.
Really? I mean, honestly. Ugh. Several months later, her brother claimed she was not receiving adequate treatment for an unspecified cancer while in custody, which I do not believe.
I'm going to say it. Don't care.
I really don't think she was suffering, though. I truly don't.
It feels disingenuous.
It does.
That's, I think, like part of the reason why I can just kind of be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. So sorry, not sorry.
Right. You murdered somebody?
And got away with it.
So,
for like 30 years. 20 years, whatever it is, a long ass time.
Been a
way
very
longer
long time.
than it should have been.
Absolutely. Now, in October, the defendant sought the dismissal of the entire case, asserting that initial investigators failed to identify her as a suspect. Okay. The motion highlighted missing elements from the original file, such as interview recordings, Sherri's blood toxicology report, and an alleged failed polygraph test by John. I have no idea what any of that really entailed.
What does that have to do with DNA that's found on a murder victim's body?
Right.
I'm just asking. If you guys know better than me, please tell me.
Asking for a friend.
But again,
it's me. I'm the
there's
friend.
a lot. I know it's me. Surprise. There are a lot of cases that are overturned on technicalities, but none of this seems integral to the prosecution.
It seemed odd. They also tried to argue that the delay in bringing charges led to the degrading and quality of evidence over 23 years, which in turn violated her due process rights.
What about Sherri's rights?
Right.
Ugh.
You know, the right to live. The defense claimed that the state's negligence in this delay justified dismissing the case. They were really just pulling out all the stops. They were citing the truth and evidence provisions of the California Constitution, whatever that means for them. Prosecutors countered that federal standard required proof of intentional delay for it to be considered prejudicial, which basically means that that's not what happened here, because it wasn't intentional.
I mean,
at least it didn't seem that way.
Right.
Because they just didn't. I feel like not looking into a lead is not the same as intentionally delaying her specific trial.
Right.
That's how it read to me.
I mean, me too. Again, if you guys know more, let us know.
Presiding Judge Perry sided with the prosecutors. After all, they allowed the case to proceed. This was just the first of many motions made by the defense in an attempt to prevent the trial from happening. Unfortunately for Stephanie, the judge disagreed with pretty much everything presented, and they moved forward into the next phase.
Go Judge Perry. Woo.
Hell yeah.
So this whole rigmarole finally resulted in a trial starting in early 2012. In LA County Superior Court, prosecutors argued Stephanie Lazarus's motive for the murder was jealousy over Sherri Rasmussen's relationship with John Rutan. In his opening statement, prosecutor Shannon Presby summed up the case as, quote, "A bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart. That's the evidence that will prove to you that defendant Stephanie Lazarus murdered Sherri Rasmussen," end quote.
I love how dramatic the opening statements always are.
I just feel like the court of law is sometimes like
it's a theater.
The court of like Shakespeare.
Yes, it's the theater.
A highlight of the case was John's testimony.
Dun, dun, dun.
Several times he became emotional and outwardly wept, particularly when recalling his courtship of Sherri Rasmussen.
Oh.
He allowed that having sex with Lazarus while he was engaged to his future wife was, quote unquote, a mistake.
Well, no shit, John. Duh.
Also, the fact, again, like we discussed earlier, the not drawing of boundaries, that's on you, boo-boo.
It also just makes me suspicious of you.
Right.
It's not that hard. It's really not. I tell people no all the time now. It's really fun.
Feels
actually.
Good, right?
I love it. Throwing down boundaries is my shit lately. Now, when it came to cross-examining the police detectives and other technicians who had originally investigated the killing, all of that kind of stuff was on the docket, and Overland stressed the original burglary theory. He pointed to evidence, such as the similar burglary that happened shortly after. He claimed that supported the burglary theory. He also highlighted evidence that was not analyzed, one example being a bloody fingerprint on one of the walls. Apparently, this suggested that other suspects had not been adequately excluded from consideration. Okay.
Right.
He questioned whether it could be truly inferred from the weapon used that it was Lazarus's lost gun, as .38s were in wide use, which, I mean, I guess could be a fair argument, but
that coincidence is too much coincidence for me.
Doesn't hold a lot of weight.
Just saying.
In comparison to everything.
Who else had a beef with Sherri?
Right. And since the DNA from the bite mark was central to the prosecution's case, he attacked it vigorously. He tried so hard to get that shit taken out of court, just in general. Specifically, improper storage procedures were brought up, and a hole the tube had left in an envelope that he said would have allowed Lazarus's DNA to be added to it long after it had been collected. I don't know how true this is, because I don't know how reliable the source is, but I had read somewhere that this tube of DNA, like from like the swab from the crime scene, was just in a fridge somewhere
From
for
the bite mark specifically?
Yes, from 2.5 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And they just happened to have come upon it.
It's almost like somebody tried to get rid of the evidence.
Yeah, that's so weird.
They didn't succeed. Whoops.
Oh no.
During the 2 days in which he presented the bulk of his case, Overland focused on the prosecution's theme of a heartbroken Lazarus. He introduced friends of hers who denied that she was showing any signs of violence or despondence over her failed relationship with John at the time of Sherri's murder. Excerpts from a contemporaneous journal were offered as evidence. Lazarus wrote in it of dating different men, none of them being John. He reinforced his attack on the forensic evidence. His last witness was a fingerprint expert who said that some prints at the crime scene did not match those of Lazarus, which they wouldn't if she was wearing fucking gloves.
Right.
About that.
Both the prosecution and the defense reiterated their themes in their closing arguments. After showing the jury of 8 women and 4 men photographs of a beaten, bloodied Sherri Rasmussen, prosecutor Paul Nunez told them, quote, "It wasn't a fair fight. This was prey caught in a cage with a predator," end quote. Pretty graphic, but impactful.
I mean, very, very much so.
Overland dismissed the entire case as circumstantial fluff and fill, save for the compromised bite mark DNA sample, which upsets me that he said that. He moved for a mistrial after Nunez reminded the jurors that no alibi had been provided for the time of the murder. Defendants' refusal to testify cannot be held against them. Judge Perry denied it, saying he did not take that as directly suggesting Lazarus herself had refused to testify, and thus her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination had not been violated.
You go, Judge Perry.
This guy was, I mean, I'll give him credit. He really was trying.
That's a good defense attorney, though. You're just trying to poke a hole where you can. If there's any sort of reasonable doubt, that's what can turn the case.
It's just unfortunate. I mean, I don't think it's unfortunate, but he was not going to win it.
No. As
there was far too much.
He should not have
far too much evidence pointing directly at her with big flashing neon
Again,
signs.
like we say, it's the big arrows, like
yes.
beep, beep, right here. So in March, after several days of deliberations, Stephanie Lazarus, then 52, was convicted of first-degree murder. Later that month, she was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. She is currently serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Corona, California. After credit for time served before the trial, she will be eligible for parole in December of 2034.
However,
she was scheduled for an initial suitability parole hearing on November 16th, 2023, as in like not even a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
A state parole board panel recommended parole for her on this date. This was the first parole suitability hearing for her. The grant of parole is tentative and subject to review by the state's Board of Parole Hearings in a process that can take up to 120 days. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. However, Governor Gavin Newsom could then allow the decision to stand, reverse the parole grant, or ask the full parole board to consider the issue. Of course, in between this most recent development and her conviction, there were a butt-ton of appeals. Like, whoa, like, oh my God, so many.
There were so many.
The result remained the same, however. As of now, Stephanie Lazarus is still in jail. I guess we'll just have to wait to see how long that will last. I hope indefinitely. I feel like if Nels and Loretta Rasmussen have anything to do with it, it will be forever, but nobody really knows.
I know that Sherri's sister has been pretty outspoken regarding this decision, this possible decision. She said that it felt like a slap in the face, that justice had barely been served, and that Sherri deserved better. And quite frankly, I agree with her.
Me too, girl. Me too.
I don't know if I would feel differently had Stephanie served for those 2.5 decades, and maybe could have proved to fully rehabilitated. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't feel good about it at all.
You can't be fully rehabilitated if you still claim that you've done nothing wrong.
And that's just it, right? She still claims to be innocent.
For me, I think this was calculated. Mm-hmm. I think she meant to take out her rival, and she did so. And then she didn't get the response she wanted. Mm-hmm. So she did move on with her life. She's just pissed she got caught is what it is.
I agree, because I definitely think there was...
In my humble opinion.
No, I agree. I definitely think there was a part of her that thought once Sherri was out of the picture that she was the obvious next choice. But I think that just speaks to how delusional she was.
Well, she wanted what she wanted, and she wanted it now. And when she didn't get it,
as the incomparable Charlotte Dobre would say.
Delulu is a good...
It's so true.
It's fitting here.
So we're definitely going to keep an eye on this, because this is one of those cases that, again, was just so big when we were like growing up, because in the 90s, and then again, as we were adults, when she was arrested. So this has been something that's kind of played out over the course of both of our lives. So I'm very curious to see how this turns out. There's
very clearly movement currently within the last month. So I'm interested to see.
Even if something, don't worry, even if this pops up during our time off, Susan and I have discussed it. We're definitely going to pop in and let you guys know if there is any
leave you hanging
developments. And with that being said, if you guys are interested, there is a lot of more detailed information regarding pretrial motions, regarding the appeals, like we said, there's a shit ton.
All of the legality of it is very interesting.
It is.
Every appeal that they tried to make, I was intrigued by. It's just so much.
We had to make some choices. But if that's something that you guys would be interested in, we would be more than happy to throw together a quick Don't Drink with Strangers or do a little bonus episode action for you.
Because we've already done all the research and stuff. Just let us know if that's something you're interested in. I just felt like it would
bog down a lot of this part. The legal stuff is interesting to me. It's the most interesting part for me, but it's also not fun to listen to always.
The psychoticness of Stephanie Lazarus for me was what I was like just enthralled. This bitch is cray-cray.
Cuckoo bananas.
And I just feel like Sherri Rasmussen deserved better.
She did.
She still deserves better, in my humble opinion.
And hopefully she won't be granted parole. I guess we'll see what happens.
I know.
Fingers crossed, right?
And toes.
Yeah.
If you can. Just saying.
Yep. And on that note, we're going to get out of here, guys.
Yeah.
Because I'm pooped. It's been a long day.
It's been a long week, and it's Thursday. So
right.
It'll be fine, though.
Thank you guys for stopping by. I hope that you found this case just as interesting as we did. Please let us know what your thoughts are. We're so curious to know. Do you think that John has anything to do with it? Do you think that he's guilty in the sense of leading Stephanie on? I sure do.
Was justice served at all?
Yeah.
I feel very unfulfilled here. I can only imagine how Nels and Loretta Rasmussen would feel.
If parole was not on the table for her suddenly, I feel like I would probably think differently, but this is the way the cookie's crumbling.
Mad, right?
I know. But thank you guys for hanging out. Always thank you for your incredible support. We just appreciate you guys so much.
And just to make sure, be sure you're following the podcast on social media so we can all hang out all the time. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at Crime and Spirits Pod. On TikTok, we're at Crime and Spirits Podcast. This is where you can find ingredients, recipes, fun videos, all the things showing you how to make every drink. If you're interested in that, let us know. Just hit the like button,
Like and subscribe.
Right. If you'd like to follow us personally, you can find us each on Instagram. I am at Suze, not Susan.
And I'm at Brie_not the cheese. Brie is spelled Bree.
Not like the cheese.
Not like the cheese. If you're into what we're doing over here, which we really, really hope you are, pretty pleased with sugar on top, go leave us a rating and or review. It's preferably an Apple Podcast. That's like kind of the big guy. But honestly, wherever. We love to get your feedback. We love to know what you guys are thinking and how you're feeling. And it just really makes our day to hear from you. It also helps us get out there a little bit more. You know how it is. People are more likely to check something out that has been checked out by others.
Right.
Additionally, if there's anything you want us to check out, be it a case, a specific person, a specific topic, a liquor, a drink, literally anything, email us at crimeandspiritspodcast@gmail.com.
And we will look into it.
Sure will.
And finally, if you're interested in becoming a monthly supporter of our podcast, there is a link for that. You can find it in the show notes, and feel free to smash that link.
So at the end of every episode, if you have been here before, you already know, but this is the time where I tell a corny joke so we can just kind of shake off the heebie and jeebies. Don't leave each other so abruptly.
That's
it feels
true.
weird. So we want to make you laugh one last time before we skedaddle.
Absolutely.
So, where do pirates get their hooks?
Where?
At secondhand stores.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Ba-dum-bum.
That's a good one. But it's
Yeah. I was going to look for a sound, but I like it better when we do it.
no, it's more fun that way.
All right, my friends. Thank you guys for hanging out. If you are sipping along with us and you are hanging out with some cocktails, make sure you're doing so responsibly. We want to make sure everybody's being safe. Please don't get behind the wheel of a car. Just hang out, drink a glass of water, order some DoorDash
Have
or something.
some snacks.
Just have a seat, listen to another podcast, maybe from the network. Check
or
it
listen
out.
to another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
PodMoth. Do it up.
Thank you guys. I hope you have the best rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.